Welcome back to Inside Report. I'm Bill Marshall, a senior investigator here at Judicial Watch, and I have the great honor and privilege of having one of the nation's great political reporters with me as a guest today, Chuck Ross of the Daily Caller News Foundation. Chuck is a great friend of Judicial Watch, and we're in fact representing him in some of our lawsuits, and Chuck and I have been actually collaborating on some of our work. So Chuck, thanks for joining us today. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. It's a pleasure to be on.
Yeah. In fact, one of the cases that we have been collaborating on closely is getting records out of the State Department related to Christopher Steele. And we're being very ably represented by my colleague, Michael Bekesha, one of our great attorneys here. And those records have really been, revelatory, right? They produced some terrific information, particularly relating to Jonathan Weiner, top State Department official, who, of course, was one of the key players, along with State Department, I believe she was Deputy Assistant Secretary Kathleen Kavalek, who were virulently anti-Trump, of course, and I would argue were seminal, actors in the coup attempt particularly during the late stages of the 2016 presidential campaign. Kathleen Kavalek, of course, met with Christopher Steele, and she actually had questions about his credibility based on some of the information that he provided to her, such as claiming that there was a Russian consulate in Miami. Of course, there was not, and she flagged that. And in fact, I think she brought that to the attention of the FBI and said, there's some reporting. We're getting some reporting from this guy which is not accurate and should call him, his credibility into question somewhat. You wrote a piece, I think it came out yesterday in the Daily Caller, where you're talking about you were questioning whether Chris Steele would be prosecuted for lying to the FBI, and we know that he did because they said in their application for a warrant on Carter Page that Chris Steele had told them that he had not spoken with any media about his so-called dossier at the time that they interviewed him, and at the time of the FISA warrant application in October 2016. But then it came out in the UK court filing later on that no, in fact, he had been speaking to AP and Yahoo News and other reporters up in September of 2016. So my question to you is, do you think Chris Steele will be prosecuted?
It's hard to say as far just not knowing. It's up to the U.S. attorneys. Also, there are the extradition issues. Prosecuting a foreigner that may prevent some from wanting to go forward with the case. But what we do know, and I did write about this yesterday. So at the beginning of 2018, Chuck Grassley and Lindsey Graham submitted a referral of sorts to the Justice Department and FBI, asking the leadership there to investigate whether Christopher Steele indeed lied about his media contacts, because it's slowly come out over the past 2 years nearly. In the FISA application, the application to to spy on Carter Page, it says in a footnote that Christopher Steele, well, they call him Source One, but we now know it to be Steele, that he said he only shared his information with his employer, which was Fusion GPS, and the FBI. And as you kind of laid out there, we know through not only Steele's own revelations in a British court filing, but also through other media reporting, and also through a book that came out last week written by the founders of Fusion GPS, that they had all sorts of meetings with reporters in the September-October 2016 timeframe. And they were actively providing this information to reporters. So it wasn't a case of Steele just accidentally mentioning parts of the dossier to people. It was meetings that were set up in Washington, D.C. hotels. And in one case, Steele and Fusion went to the Washington Post's headquarters to meet with reporters. There could be the other issue, so it looks like Steele lied, misled, gave a false statement, whatever term you want to use. There is also the possibility that, the FBI erred in putting inaccurate information in their FISA about what Steele did or didn't tell them. So either way, however you want to look at it, someone needs to explain what happened here. It's a major issue. Steele's contacts with the media are a major part of this whole debacle that we've been sorting through for the past 3 years. Thanks to the help from you guys. Not to go on a rant here, but one thing that's come out from the lawsuit that you guys have represented me in, and we filed that I believe it was last June, 2018. It came out that Glenn Simpson, the founder of Fusion GPS, reached out to Jonathan Weiner, the State Department official. He was Christopher Steele's handler at the State Department, essentially. Glenn Simpson reached out to Weiner at a crucial moment in September 2016. Glenn Simpson emailed Weiner the day before this Yahoo News article came out that was based on the dossier. So it looks like there was a kind of a cabal, a group of people that were working to create this story, to get this story out in the media, and it involved Steele, reporters, Fusion GPS, and people at the State Department, which is a huge issue. Right,
and I think that's one of the things that that lawsuit did, that our lawsuit did with respect to that Michael's representing us on against the State Department, was that it sort of plumbed the depths of the involvement of the State Department, which I don't think was as widely known in the whole conspiracy. I mean, we knew the DOJ, we knew CIA, FBI, even ONA, the Office of Net Assessments at DOD was involved in this thing. But I think it was those communications that we've been getting, which sort of expanded the whole conspiracy into the State Department, which was very, very interesting. You had a report today, actually, I think in Daily Caller, where you discussed how the FBI disclosed in a human source validation report that they only had a medium level of confidence in Christopher Steele, and this report was prepared, I believe, in February of 2017. But they only had a medium level of confidence in him as a human source, as a confidential source. And what's interesting is that I actually there was a memorandum that was sent in January, I believe it was January 2017, by the British National Security Advisor, Sir Mark Lyle Grant, to then National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, I believe it was, in which he called into question Christopher Steele's credibility, which begs the question then: why was the FBI able to secure at least 2 additional FISA warrant or renewals on their initial October 2016 FISA warrant application against Carter Page? If the dossier, upon which those applications were essentially based, was determined to have minimal corroboration. So that brings up a sort of another question for you, is that, do you think there's going to be, I realize I'm asking you to sort of gaze into a crystal ball, but based on your experience and your contacts within the national security establishment and sort of the political establishment here, do you think there's going to be wholesale changes made to the whole FISA process? Because this is obviously the most intrusive technique that the government has to spy on an individual, and they can use any means. They can look at everything that a person, if they have a FISA warrant against an individual, they can look at emails, listen on telephone calls. They can surveil them physically, per my understanding. It's an all-encompassing look at an individual without their awareness and without them having without it being an adversarial process where they can be represented by counsel and go to court and argue why they shouldn't be surveilled. So obviously the whole point of surveillance is that it's it's a covert process. But do you anticipate, again, sort of asking you to put on a Karnak hat, but that there will be changes based on maybe anything you're hearing, among your your network of sources in the political establishment? Any changes to the FISA process?
Honestly, I'm not confident that there will be any wholesale changes or any major changes. I think we can expect some recommendations from Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General, and those might focus on some of the process as far as maybe, and also pertaining to political or presidential candidates. There, you could see something in the report that maybe puts in extra precautions or extra measures to avoid another situation like 2016, where the FBI goes after a presidential campaign. Maybe there'll be a higher bar for those types of surveillance procedures. But as far as those being implemented, once it gets into that bureaucracy, there's going to be all the normal infighting where, Justice Department and FBI don't want to give up any of their powers. They don't want to be forced to jump through more hoops to make their FISA warrant applications more legitimate and everything like that. So, I think we'll see some recommendations. We'll see some talk about it. Maybe some Republicans on Capitol Hill will push the issue, maybe push for some legislation. I think that would be another way that would happen. But in talking to my sources in Capitol Hill, kind of about the whole FISA process, I'm not hearing a lot of political willpower to take that on. I'm not hearing a lot of chatter about that at this point. They're going through impeachment and all those proceedings, and then the campaign will gear up, and I don't know if there will be time to put in any legislation, at least before the election next year.
Right. Well, the FISA itself, the whole the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, was created as a result of the Church Committee. It was another sort of seminal moment, a political moment in U.S. history in the 1970s, when you had things like Operation COINTELPRO. You had all of these government surveillance activities going on domestically into domestic organizations that were of concern, like I believe SDS and maybe the Weather Underground and the Black Panthers and all that, those groups. And it was, I think, the exposure of those that government sort of intrusion into those domestic organizations that eventually resulted in I think I believe the FISA Act itself. So I'm just thinking that we're sort of at another seminal moment like that in our politics today, in our national politics, where we need to do another overhaul, another revamp, and take another hard look at this law. But you mentioned impeachment, which brings me actually my next question. One of the things I was really shocked by in the Schiff impeachment report was the telephone record collection that was going on of the president's attorneys. I mean, this is just truly amazing. You had Rudy Giuliani, apparently, Jay Sekulow, Victoria Tensing, plus over Congressman Devin Nunes, who of course was on I believe was on Tucker Carlson last night. He was saying, I have civil rights too. I have civil liberties that are being trampled here. The president's civil liberties are being trampled. Congressman Nunes's were, and you had a reporter, John Solomon. They were looking at all of their toll records. I'd be interested as a reporter to get your take on that. This is reminiscent to me of what they were doing to James Rosen at Fox during the Obama administration, and looking at Senate phone calls, and that kind of toll information is just, to me, that's a shocking abuse of power.
Yeah, I don't like to use this word. This is kind of a buzzword, but chilling, I guess, is kind of the feeling I had reading that and seeing that. Adam Schiff has a lot to answer for how he obtained those phone records. Now, the way I don't know who he subpoenaed. I assume he has subpoenaed this Lev Parnas, who is the the Ukraine-born guy who's working with Rudy Giuliani. I understand if you subpoena certain private individuals and find some phone calls with, different people, even if it's with a congressman or a reporter or whoever. But Schiff took the additional step of publishing those, not knowing what was said in the phone calls.
Right.
He just threw them out there, obviously to smear up some people, including Devin Nunes. I honestly think that was probably one of his main targets there. They've been very adversarial over throughout the Russia investigation and Ukraine investigation. So that's the thing that really got me. It is definitely troubling that Schiff got phone records of a reporter and also Trump's personal lawyers. I mean, I figured that I'm not a lawyer myself, but I just assumed that there was some sort of attorney-client privilege that would be, at play there. But for him to put those in the report without context, he just simply put the dates and the names and nothing else.
Right.
It's obvious what his ploy was by doing that, what his intention was in doing that, and I thought it was really disturbing. But I hate to be cynical, but I have no confidence that Schiff will ever have to explain any of this. The people he speaks to in the media, CNN, MSNBC, all those types, they're not going to ask him how he came by this information, right, or why he decided to publish it, or how it's relevant to the impeachment proceedings now. These phone records, for the audience, so the audience knows, these are 3 months before President Trump's phone call with Ukraine's prime minister that is at the center of all of this. So I'd love to see more come out about why Schiff did this, but I won't hold my breath.
Right. Now, it's being reported, I guess, based on leaks to the New York Times and elsewhere. And of course, those who are leaking have a vested interest in doing so. But they're sort of giving glimpses as to what Michael Horowitz is going to say in his report. And apparently, one of the things that's being put out there, and we'll find out in just a few days, but is that Horowitz going to find that the FBI had sufficient predication to launch Operation Crossfire Hurricane. Of course, this is the counterintelligence operation against the Trump campaign. I just like to get your sense of your view on that. I mean, to me, maybe it can be argued I'm a conservative and I sort of have I have strong views on this subject, but I view this, and I come, from many years ago, I came from a law enforcement intelligence background. I view the entire thing as so obviously fraudulently predicated. You had these lures being used, like Joseph Mifsud and Stefan Halper overseas, these Oconus lures off the continental United States. If in fact Horowitz finds that there is no political bias or as the genesis of this counterintelligence operation, I think a lot of people are going to be sort of shaking their heads and disappointed, if you will. Do you have any views on that? I mean, you've been following this story for years now, like everybody else, very closely and reporting it, investigating it. Do you think it's going to sit well with the American people? That sort of assessment.
Well, I mean, some it will, some it won't. Depends on which side, I guess, of the divide you are. I kind of, when you asked about the leaks that have come out in the newspapers over the past couple weeks, and they tend to be to New York Times and Washington Post, interestingly enough. So they're obviously trying to lower expectations. I'm hearing, let's just say that I'm hearing that, we need to definitely wait for the full report to come out, in the sense of it's still not going to paint a pretty picture for the FBI, no matter what leaks come out. And And you know, the main leaks, as you touched on, are that the FBI had a proper predication to open Crossfire Hurricane, and that the FISA application to surveil Carter Page was also properly predicated. Mm-hmm. The thing about that is, you know, it's a very low bar to do both of those things, really. I mean, a very low bar to open a counterintelligence investigation, also a pretty low bar to obtain a surveillance warrant. Right. So the question is, you know, if the FBI could get open an investigation on almost anyone within reason of who they wanted to go after, why did they choose those people in the first place? That's the question. The other question is, or the other point is, you know, they opened the investigation Crossfire Hurricane, you know, looking to see whether the Trump campaign was colluding with Russia. They opened a surveillance file on Carter Page on the premise that there was probable cause to believe that he was an agent of Russia. Both of those things, the premise of both of those was debunked by the special counsel's report. It's been debunked before by reporting and everything like that, but the special counsel's report really put the nail in the coffin of both of those by saying that no Trump associates were Russian agents. There was no conspiracy or collusion with Russia. But the media and I'd say the larger media, mainstream media, whatever you want to call them, has done a remarkable job at kind of shifting the framing of all of this. Mm-hmm. So now we're not talking so much about how did the FBI get it so wrong. We're talking about, you know, one headline yesterday in the Washington Post spoke of how Horowitz's report is going to debunk some right-wing conspiracy theory about Joseph Mifsud. Which is, you know, it maybe the report will undercut that theory about Joseph Mifsud, but that's kind of missing the point that the main conspiracy theory here was that Trump was in bed with Russia, that the Steele dossier was accurate, and also, speaking of Mifsud, that Mifsud was a Russian agent. There's still no proof that he was, but now they're over here trying to debunk right-wing, quote-unquote, right-wing conspiracy theories. So, you know, I going back to kind of what I said before, I'm hearing that despite whatever the leaks may try to portray, that this report is still going to be strong evidence. Now, how it's interpreted through the lens of the larger press, you know, is a totally different question. I mean, you know, CNN and MSNBC are going to be the conduit for most of this information, and CNN already employs half of the people who are going to be, you know, criticizing this report anyway. So I'm not confident that they're going to inform the public of how bad things were at the FBI. Right. But, you know, yeah.
One of the things I've been trying to get through FOIA, and I think we're litigating this for this, is the original electronic communication. You may recall that there was an electronic communication sent to the FBI, I believe, from, I think it was CIA. Offhand, I don't remember, but it was, which sort of launched, you know, it was the electronic communication that launched 1,000 ships, you know, that started the whole ball in process. So I'm trying to get that, as well as I'm trying to get through both the DOJ and the UK Cabinet Office, because because the UK also has a FOIA law. I've been trying to get the grant communique that I mentioned earlier, which was sent to Mike Flynn in January 2017, which basically undercut the credibility of Christopher Steele. You know, one of the things, and speaking of this whole of the foreign counter of the, you know, Operation Crossfire Hurricane, my boss Chris Farrell wrote a really interesting column at GatesstoneInstitute.org on December 2nd, where now Chris, I should say, is he's, in addition to being the director of investigations of Judicial Watch for 20 years and investigating government corruption, was an Army counterintelligence officer prior to that. Very familiar with all of these, how these operations are run. And he had this very interesting analysis in which he said that Operation Crossfire Hurricane was essentially a foreign counterintelligence investigation that was imported into the United States, as opposed to sort of a direct domestic intelligence operation, which would have required the sign-off, I believe, of Attorney General Loretta Lynch. Would have required her authorization. But in his view, that was fraught with all kinds of political implications. So they concocted this scheme using these Oconus laws, Mifsud and all, to create the basis, the foundation for this bogus counterintelligence operation against the Trump campaign. They created it overseas, and then they injected it into the into the national security establishment of the United States. But one of the things that Chris alludes to or cites in his column, which I thought was very interesting, fascinating reading, is a complaint in a defamation case. I don't know if you've seen this, filed by Svetlana Lokova against Stefan Halper and the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and a couple of other media outlets. Because you recall that Svetlana Lokova was this British citizen of Russian descent who was a student, or she was a fellow at Cambridge University, and she was essentially, apparently, according to her, and I have no reason not to believe her, she was completely innocent, but she knew Stefan Halper at Cambridge and a number of other academics there, Richard Dearlove and others. And of course, Stefan Halper fraudulently, in her, according to her, accused her of being a Russian spy and of being Michael Flynn's lover, or romantically involved with Michael Flynn. And this, created this whisper campaign and all this. But if you read this complaint that she wrote, it's a fascinating dissection and a great timeline of how the intelligence service, Western intelligence services, can sort of set up someone to be defamed and smeared, and how that could then became the basis largely of the whole attack on Flynn and the basis for Operation Crossfire Hurricane. I recommend it to everyone. Again, GatesstoneInstitute.org, Chris Farrell article, December 2nd, and then there's a link to the complaint within the column, which is really worth reading. Very interesting analysis. And which brings me to another question. Do you think that Trump can ever rely on our allies like Britain and Australia and Italy, whose governments, were wrapped up in this whole effort to take him out as a candidate? I mean, to me, I can understand why he would be he would sort of look askance at cooperating with them or having close relationships with them when they were, it seems, very active with the FBI and the CIA under the Obama administration in trying to remove him.
Yeah, I don't know. I think of the three that you mentioned, I think the UK kind of has the most to answer for, and I'm not, of course, privy to what conversations President Trump has had with the prime ministers over there about their activities, mainly in 2015 and 2016. I kind of surely the British are somewhat embarrassed about some of the things that they were involved in. Not only the fact that Christopher Steele is, a former MI6 officer who's still plugged into the national security infrastructure over there. They have a lot to answer for. And kind of jumping back, this is a little segue from your question, but Svetlana Lokova is a absolutely fascinating part of all this. So, I saw Chris's article on that actually the other day, and I started talking to Svetlana last year when I did reporting on Stefan Halper. Mm-hmm. It came out that he was an FBI informant, and I contacted Svetlana, and she gave me her whole story, her fascinating story about her interactions at Cambridge with Halper, and we know that the Horowitz report, we don't know, but there have been leaks that the Horowitz report, it will discuss Stefan Halper, at least as far as his involvement with the Trump campaign. But there's an entire thing before July 2016. Stefan Halper has, invites Svetlana through an intermediary to his apartment for a small dinner in January 2016. Svetlana says, and she shared emails with me showing the invite and everything like that. She declined the invitation because her and Stefan Halper did not get along at all. They had barely interacted, and when they did, they were not on friendly terms. So at the time, she thought it was a strange invitation. But after everything has come out about Stefan Halper and about all the investigation of all the Trump associates, Svetlana, she writes in her complaint that, she's now she thinks that essentially she was invited to this dinner in order to try to get information about Michael Flynn,
right,
from a meeting or, interactions they all had 2 years earlier. So I don't know if the IG report will address any of that, but it's a fascinating part of all of this and raises the question of how far back was Halper looking at Halper and or whoever his government handlers were. How far back were they actually looking at Trump associates? We know FBI claims it started in July 2016. We have all the reason in the world to believe it was well before that.
Right. Agreed. Yeah. So we're just about out of time, but I find the whole Kevin Kleinsmith, the FBI lawyer, altering emails, which of course was part of the supporting documentation for the FISA warrant applications. Carter Page, fairly integral. I actually, interestingly, you may find this interesting. Back in, I think it was probably June 2018, I sent a request to the FBI for Kevin Kleinsmith's communications about Trump, about Hillary, for his expense reports and that sort of thing. They actually glomarred me. They said they can either confirm or, and now this is routine stuff. When you ask for a government employee's calendar entries or expense reports, it's almost unheard of to get we can neither confirm nor deny that we have those records. This is stuff we ask for all the time. I had asked for the same materials for what I think is now his wife, another key player in the anti-Trump cabal there, Sally Moyer. I believe she was a lawyer and FBI agent who was also, had a pivotal role in all this, because she and Kleinsmith, and this information came out back in 2018, I believe it was, were sending these very virulently anti-Trump texts. They also glomarred me on that. They said we can either confirm or deny that we have these records. They did the same thing to me with Joe Pienka's records when I asked for those. I just found all that remarkable. I remember saying to our lawyers here, this is unheard of. They're saying they cannot even acknowledge that these people, that these FBI employees maintain calendars, or this is routine stuff that we always get. So I think we're going to take a new look at that. I think we're going to litigate those cases now. It should be fun stuff if we ever actually get the records. But I just find it interesting that going all the way back to middle of last year, there was something up with these people, that they weren't even. Like they were issuing a glomar response, which if you're in the FOIA world is like almost it's like if there's a black program that the government can't even acknowledge. Of course, glomar, it's we can neither confirm nor deny is the famous sort of quote that they use in their letters and all that. But
I can add a little bit. I'll be brief. I can add a little bit on Kleinsmith, not nothing major. But first of all, I find it fascinating that the leaks about him call him a low-level FBI attorney. They're definitely trying to downplay his role, even though the IG report last year said that he was the lead FBI lawyer on the Russia investigation, or before it became special counsel's investigation. But just really quickly, last year when the stuff about Kleinsmith came out, I reached out to the special counsel's team just to find out what was going on. They usually, anytime you reach out to the special counsel's office, they just gave you no comment. Mm-hmm. But the one time I actually got a phone call back from the spokesman was about Kleinsmith, and it was again them just trying to he only was in an administrative role on the special counsel's team. He had no involvement in the investigation. And I don't know the timeline of when they figured out that he was altering documents, but in hindsight, it makes me wonder, were they circling the wagons that early on? I mean, we'll see what the report says on Monday. On Monday, but there still seems like something there. So the lawsuit would be a pretty good idea. Yeah,
and truthfully, I'm not confident with Chris Wray as the director. That they're not going to continue to circle the wagons, despite Attorney General Barr is saying that he's a great, great patriot, good friend, or whatever. I have my doubts. Anyway, Chuck, thank you very much for joining me today on the program. Your work is phenomenal. All you guys over there at Daily Caller are doing great work, and hopefully we can collaborate in more cases down the road and in litigation, help you guys with some of your litigation. I'd like to thank you for joining us today on the program. If you like the work that we do and you'd like to support us, please visit our website, judicialwatch.org. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.